pleasure to introduce our program today, coming to us from some very familiar faces, and Rotarian Tom Hatch and Doug Fuller, both past presidents of the club. Tom, as some of you may or may not know, spent his career as an editor and publisher. Doug, as we also know, has spent his career as a Kent-based architect. And they're joined today by Mark Prues, who is a Kent State graduate, starting his career as an apprentice architect here in Kent. And they've all worked and collaborated together to bring us what they're going to talk about today, which is the historical facades of Kent. So I will turn it over to the three of you. We're looking forward to it.
Thanks very much, Dave, and thanks, President Randy. We're going to talk today about a new book that's just been published called Historic Facades of Kent, Ohio. It's 144 pages, chock block full of cool photographs and some words to read as well. So I'm going to share my screen and get started with this presentation. I've never done this before, so let's see how it works. All right, I think we're there. Let me know if you can see my screen. We're good? There we go. Okay. Historic Facades of Kent, Ohio is the title of the book. The subtitle, Look to Our Past, Envision the Future. I have to give a shout out to Mary Beth Harper, who helped come up with that. But it talks about the importance of this book as one that shows us a lot about our past as we begin to think about what the future of our town is going to look like. The author is Mark Prues, whom you will meet in a bit, and I was the editor. Kent Historical and Main Street Kent are very proud to announce the publication of this book. It traces the history of buildings in the downtown historic district, identifying the architectural style that best describes each, and it presents hundreds of historic and current photographs of our downtown. Today, you'll hear the story behind the creation of this book, meet its author, Mark Prues, and hear some commentary from architect Doug Fuller, who was involved in shepherding this project from its inception to its completion. But first, the story behind the book. Who remembers Franklin Avenue as it was not very long ago? You can see Ray's and Dominic's here. This is the 1970s. The place looked like this really almost up until the end of the 20th century. And I'm sure many of you remember this. But here's Franklin Avenue today, quite a difference. So part of the reason that we wanted to publish this book is to encourage people to make the transition that you've just seen here from old days to new days. Here's another view, absolutely beautiful, a place we all want to be. So notice especially the facade of Dominic's. Think about how did we go from this? How do we go from this to this? There are many other examples in our town of transformation that has significantly impacted our environment. So let me give you another example here. Here is Thompson Drug as it was in about 1920. I love the cars. I love the street light in the middle of the street. If you look very carefully in the window above the entrance door on Main Street, you can see Dr. Dumm and Dr. Stevenson listed. That was where their offices were. And then here's Thompson Drug today with one of our burgeoning restaurants. Quite a different look, but that's where we are today. I'm sure many of you will recognize this as the original Kent block, built by the Kent family in the middle of the 19th century. At the time it was built, it was bigger than anything in Cleveland or Akron as a commercial building. The Kent family had a big vision about what Kent was going to be, and this was an expression of that vision. It was later modified, and you'll notice the rose window that was added and the pediment at the top. This picture looks to be about 1949, maybe 1950. And of course, you know what happened in the 70s. Many of you have vivid recollections of this day and this fire. And then today, this is the site. Fire has been an important element in transforming our town over many years and through many decades. I think you may all remember, or not all, but many of you may remember Hans, a great hangout place in downtown Kent. And here's Hans today. At least we have an outdoor seating venue for COVID era meals and drinks. This photograph is the Longcoy grocery store on South Water Street. This photograph was taken on February 12th, 1912, which, fun fact, is the same day as my mother's birth. It was destroyed by fire that day and torn down and then replaced later in 1915 by the building that still stands there today. Not all buildings burned down. You may recognize or may not recognize this. This is the Carver building on North Water Street. The building next to it is part of the Kent block. This is the building that houses today Hometown Bank. You can see a very different facade from the one that we see today. In recent years, this building has been enhanced quite a bit by the pediment. Doesn't look the way it did originally, but it certainly is a nice addition to our downtown with historically appropriate revisions and renovations. So back to Dominic's, and Dominic's plays a role in the creation of the book that we're presenting today, in a sense. In the early days of Ron Berbick's interest in redevelopment, he established a facade fund with the city of Kent that was designed to help building owners renovate and upgrade their buildings. We've also dedicated this book to Ron because of his influence on our downtown area. Dominic's benefited from the facade fund. Unfortunately, the fund is no longer available, but at the time, Main Street Kent and Kent Historical Society board members and staff became interested in how we could support building owners in Kent upgrade and enhance their building facades, much as Dominic's had been transformed. Through the leadership of DS Architecture's Jeff Myers, who was head of the Main Street Kent Design Committee at the time, an opportunity presented itself to obtain a grant from the OMIC, Ohio Means Internships and Co-ops, which is a public-private project of Ohio's Department of Higher Education. The idea was to provide a paid internship to a Kent State architecture student to gather photographs and descriptive information about the architectural history of downtown buildings and create an online database that anyone interested could access. It was our great good fortune that Mark Prues was tapped for this internship. At the time, Mark was a student in the School of Architecture And during the project, he worked very closely with the team at DS Architecture, including Doug Fuller, and used the photo archives of the Kent Historical Society to great effect. He put together this study of approximately 60 buildings in downtown Kent. This locator map, which appears on the inside front cover of the book, shows the scope of his work. We cover almost every building from Crane Avenue all the way to Erie Street, and from the river up to DePeyster Street. The table of contents of the book lists each of the buildings by location and address, so they're easy to find. And this is the cover of the book. In 2018, Mark's work was just about complete when he presented the database he had created to the Main Street Design Committee, of which I was a member. When I saw what he had done, I promoted the idea of publishing the work in book form by Kent Historical Society Press. Mark and I then embarked on a year-long effort to rewrite and edit the book and to do extensive pre-press production work to prepare the files for printing. Along the way, we were guided and vetted by several people, including Howard Boyle, Jim Myers, Alan Orshan, and Doug Fuller, who really helped us make sure that what we were saying in our book was accurate and relevant. I would like now to present and introduce Mark Prues, who is going to tell us a little bit more about the book, about himself, and take us through the book. Mark is currently a designer with Metis Construction, and we were very fortunate to have him not only working in Kent, but he just bought a house here with his new wife, Ashley. So Mark, please take over.
Hello, thank you for having us here. Like Tom said, my name is Mark Prues. I graduated from Kent State a year or two ago, and I have always had a passion for architecture, and working on this and working on the book just really propelled that even more. So I'd like to kind of get into kind of the process and what I did with the book. So if I could have the next slide. So this is a general appearance of what one of the spreads in the book would look like. This one is on the Kent National Bank building, currently the Huntington Bank building. Basically, the way I started it, I wanted to create a way that you could see generally where this building would be in the city. So that's why I included the context map in the upper left corner. Along with that context map is also a point by point, or a timeline of events for that building. This is a general kind of overview of the building, a few important dates, but the paragraph below the timeline gets more into the history of the building, some of the occupancy of the building, just other more informative facts about the building itself. And then below that, I wanted to have images of the building, both previous and current, to be able to show what it used to look like or what used to be there. In this case, this page shows the original corner of Main and South Water Street. Then when the Kent National Bank building was built, that's the second larger image. And then the modern in color image is the modern appearance of the building. Then on the following page, the images that are on that are just images for the progression of that building's history. I try to get as many different decades or many different eras of that building's life to show how it could have changed or how it did change or how it appeared originally. for better or for worse in some cases. And then the next paragraph, the style of architecture, basically, I just wanted to try to allow everyone to know what style of architecture the buildings are in downtown Kent. As Tom said, originally this was going to be a database for building owners and store owners to potentially redevelop their storefronts, and part of that requirement from the city when the grant was still around was to make sure that it was a correct style representation of what had existed, or just that it was a correct style for the city. Next slide, please.
Hang on, I'm having a problem. There you
go. This is just another spread in the book. It is the Bethel building, which is actually right next door to the Kent National Block building. When I first came to Kent, I thought that block, the Kent National Block and the Bethel block, were the same building. I found out through my research and through talking with Howard Boyle and a few others that it was actually two separate buildings. So it's something that shows even the knowledge that is shared through different individuals in the city, and just learning more about the city for other people. Next slide, please. Like I said earlier, this is the image of the original, or the earliest known image of the intersection of Main and Water Street. This would become the location of the Kent National Bank building in potentially a few short years. Although these buildings on the corner in the foreground are no longer here, the houses in the background are some of the houses that are along Columbus Street that are still here and still generally in the same shape and form that they were. Next slide, please. This is one of the earliest known images of the Kent National Block building. This is prior to the Bethel building's construction, because it is only occupying the corner of the corner of the intersection. This would have been right around 1867. It was built by Marvin and Charles Kent to house the Kent National Bank. And then on the third floor, Marvin actually had an opera house on there that could hold 700 people. The Bethel building would be built in 1871, but there would be a small addition prior to that that we'll be able to see in a few images to come. Next slide, please. This is an image showing both the Kent National Block building and the Bethel building. This would be right around 1875, 4 years after the Bethel building had been built. There are a few points of interest that you can see in this image. The first one is the light wells that are along North Water Street from the Kent National Bank corner. In the past, it was easier to build down than up. So the light wells would allow the basement area to become a more usable space for the building. It wouldn't be the best space, but it was a usable space and could provide rent and income for the building owner. And then the second interesting point is you can see where the Bethel building and the Kent National Block building kind of separate. If you look at the window hoods, the Kent National Block building has an arched window hood, where the Bethel building has a more square window hood. The Bethel block has actually both window hoods because the small addition that was built onto the Kent National Bank building prior to the Bethel building had the arched windows. So if you count 7 windows over, that is where the Bethel block begins. Next slide, please. This is just showing a little bit more about the Bethel block. Like I said, you can see the two different types of window hoods on it. The arched is slightly older than the squared because of the smaller addition to the Kent National Block building was built sometime between the 67 and 71 year dates. I was unfortunately unable to find when that smaller addition was built, but I know it's between 1867 or 1871. In this image, you can also see on the ground floor, the Bethel building housed the Princess Theater. It was one of the earlier moving picture theaters in the city, and this would be around the 1920s. Next slide, please. This is another image. This is just another image of the Kent National Bank building and the Bethel building. It's showing the old interband system that ran through Kent, Ravenna to Akron and to Brady Lake, I believe. This would be, again, probably right around the 1920s. The interesting aspect of this image is if you look at the third floor, it was actually taller than the ground and second floor to allow the opera house or the opera floor aspects into the building, and also kind of give it a little bit more of a height difference to the rest of the surrounding buildings. Next slide, please. This is just another close-up of the window hoods. You can really see them in the upper right corner, the squared and the arched, along with just a few of the bygone stores that used to operate out of this building before it was changed. Next slide, please. This is an interesting image because it, again, right before the Kent National Bank building and the Bethel building lost their identities, it really shows the separate identities of the two buildings, where in this image in the 1960s, the Kent National Bank building had already lost its third floor. It had already gained the green facade that is there now today. And then it also shows that the Bethel building remained, or kept its third floor for another decade. It would lose it in the 1970s, and along with the green glass being added in the 1970s. Next slide, please. And as we all know, this is the appearance of these buildings today. I would be lying if I said if I didn't miss what was there before. But this is what we got. It's not horrible. I know that's not a ringing example of that, but it's not a bad building. It serves its purpose. And with that, I would like to introduce Doug Fuller for his portion of this presentation.
Hello. Boy, you're going to leave that slide up there while I'm talking? Ouch.
But I've got another one for you, Doug. You want me to, you want me to put this one up?
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, wow. Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect. I can't stress what a great job Mark has done on this. He volunteered to do this. His interest in architecture and history had always been there, but this certainly got him deep into architecture of Kent. Downtowns in this book are just part of what communities were built around in the early 1800s in Ohio. And Kent is very similar to a lot of those in how it's developed. Our hope in doing this book is not only to create interest by general public reading it and learning a lot about our town, but also to help present or develop a preservation perspective in town, that we might think first about preserving something before we take it down or remodel it beyond its original design. But to take a look at those and realize how important they are. This is the only book I've ever seen, that doesn't mean another one doesn't exist, but the only book I've ever seen that takes in the historic downtown each individual building and how Mark was able to craft out from photographs the individual buildings, put with that the businesses that were in there, the people that built them, and the stories about them all in one book. Now, we want to make sure you understand this isn't a complete perspective of each building. It is at best an introduction, but it is far, far more than we've ever had before. I truly believe this book will be looked at 100 years from now as some of the basis of where these buildings came from, and other people will add on to it in time with what happens in the decades to come. We really hope, while it's of interest to us all locally, that people that come to us, whether they people in town or new people in town that buy some of these historic buildings and take on the responsibility of their ownership, will look at this book to understand all of what goes on around them or has gone on around them in the development of the streets and of downtown Kent. It is important to remember that most of the buildings we're looking at here are second and even third generation buildings. There were buildings that came on these sites before the ones that we have today. So downtowns do change, but preservation of a lot of what we have is important. We've lost a lot of buildings. You'll see in the book also buildings that we've lost to fire, to demolition and reconstruction, and in other ways. Can you imagine what our town would be like without the depot, the Atlantic and Great Western Railroad Depot that a lot of us knew as the Puffer Belly, and now Terreno building. But the building you're looking at right now was redeveloped, purchased by the Historic Society, and I hope my date is right around 1978. And with the help of Tom Rail, was redeveloped into the Puffer Belly. Club members were very important in that. Jim Myers, Howard Boyle, and John Flynn, and maybe others, please remind me guys if there's others, were extremely involved in this. And look at this building. Can you imagine anyone saying, oh yeah, let's restore that? It was probably the building in the worst condition in downtown Kent at that time, but yet these people had the vision of the importance of this building and what this building could be to us in the future in the town. That's what preservation is about. This is one of the most important buildings, certainly railroad depots in all of Ohio because of its design and features. So anyway, the depot, the Franklin Hotel, Franklin Hotel, speaking of Rotary members, Ron Burbick redeveloped it, post office, John Flynn just recently redeveloped it, and the Wells Sherman House that was just moved downtown has been moved from several different locations, but it's just one of the most classic early Greek revival buildings that now still exists.
Where's the park in Hudson?
I'm sorry?
It's on like Veterans Way.
Oh.
So if you go,
I think we got somebody else on the call.
what is it?
So anyway, those aspects of the redevelopment and historic perspectives. So we hope you'll buy the book. I know you're going to learn a ton from reading it. So with that, I think we'll turn it back to the rest of us. And if you have any questions, ask away.
Hey, Doug, let me just mention while I have a chance, the book is available through Kent Historical Society. You can go on the website. It's kentohiohistory.org, and you can order the book in the shop. The cost is $40, and the proceeds will go to supporting both Main Street Kent and Kent Historical Society. I'd also like to thank two organizations, Kent Rotary Foundation and Christensen Foundation, for supplying us with the resources that we needed to print this book. And so in this way, all of the proceeds from the sale of this book will go to support Kent Historical Society and Main Street Kent. So thanks very much to Kent Rotary Foundation for their help.
Great program, guys. I guess
Any
I
questions?
was curious,
today?
maybe somewhat a subjective question, but what is the oldest building that's had the least changes to its facade?
Doug.
Any thoughts on that?
There isn't a good answer to that. because all of them have had some changes. I believe one of the oldest commercial buildings that still exists is the building that Paul Braden owns now on South Water Street. It was a very utilitarian building when it was built, and it still has the details of a utilitarian building. Its second floor is probably most original. Whether that's the oldest, please somebody else jump in there. There could be other ones, because all of the dates of original construction, we don't have a lot of the exact time, and even some of the early restorations and renovations that buildings went through before we got to see them in photographs.
Great. Any other questions?
Is that book available at the Historical Society or only online?
It is available at the Historical Society, but you'll have to call in advance in order to set up a time to come in, because the hours at the Historical Society are by appointment only at this point. But call 673-2712, and Julie Kenworthy can help you.
This is Nelson Burns. I got a quick question, Tom, and maybe the group can answer it. I know when Coleman did the Phoenix building in Ravenna, the facade was coming apart with the brick and the main structure of the building. And I was wondering if that technique is used more often now to keep the integrity of the building intact. And what other uses do architects provide in order to keep that sovereignty of the facade intact historically?
Maybe Mark Prues might have some answers to that question. Are you still there, Mark?
Yeah, I'm still here, but I'm going to pass that along to Doug. He might know better.
I'm sorry.
Well, the restoration of a brick facade takes on many different aspects, depending what the problems are. Over time, moisture migrates through brick and can pop off the facade, called spalling, which takes the unique techniques to try to fix. Many buildings, however, just need to be pointed. As when we did the Franklin Hotel building, the entire building needed to be pointed. And even though there were only parts of the building that needed it, it's rather important, if possible, to do the whole building so the entire mortar of the building looks the same color, same texture. Otherwise, when you try to do a patchwork on pointing, it looks like a patchwork. Still better to have the building there than not. But,
and we used those big screws that would attach the facade back to the main part of the building. I was fascinated if that was used more often now or not.
No, it's interesting. Most of those were developed in England initially to re-anchor facades back to its original structure, given that a lot of the time the original structure was still masonry in the back, but the brick was separating from that backup layer of brick. And so they were tied together with these kind of anchors. They're rather unique piece of masonry restoration equipment.
Well, thank you very much. Great program.
Thanks. One other thing I forgot to mention, the book is also available at McKay Bricker. So if you're downtown and you want to pick one up, go to McKay Bricker and they will help you out.
All right.
Tom, this is John Flynn. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Did the old post office make the book?
Yes, it did. And that was the last piece that Mark worked on before we printed the book. So yeah, it's in there.
Okay, I'm glad. Thanks.
All right, great program, guys. And as you're aware, we always have a responder. And today that responder is going to be Jim Myers.
I'll start with Tom Hatch. Thank you, Tom, putting the program together. Doug Fuller, you gave me chills when you referenced the train station and its history. And to Mark Prues, thank you for returning. I know this is the second program you've done for us. And when I think of the time and the work that was required to photograph to research, it had to be a labor of love. People wouldn't put that much time in if it weren't. I've spent a lifetime in Kent, most of it downtown in a business, and so did my father. So the book is of extreme interest to me, and if you'll look at our roster of members, we have a lot of townies that follow that same format. I think of John Flynn, Rick Bissler, David Dix, Tom Hall, Larry Wright, and there may be others whose fathers also had businesses in downtown. So when you start looking at some of these facades and some of these buildings, the memories that you have of them just flash back, whether it was the place that you got your first suit, whether it was standing and watching one of the fires that happened. But seeing it just gives me memories that are very warm and cuddly. Thank you so much for presenting it. And it was well done so far as the technicalities are concerned, considering what we're going through in Zoom programs. Thanks to the Kent Historical Society for backing this up and to the foundations that supplied so much money. Mark, thank you for your efforts.
Okay, thank you very much, Jim. And we are officially adjourned. See you all next week.
Very good.
Jim Myers, thank you for including